Good morning, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here with the two senators. We've got not too much time to cover a lot of topics, so we will just launch right into it. So we are in election year. There's no shortage of challenges that you have to do in Congress right now, and it seems like even the basics are difficult to accomplish, including keeping the government open. So in this context, just how much of a focus is Asia, China-related policy going to be moving forward this year, and any specific legislation you think would actually come forward?
So first of all, it's great to be here, great to be with you. Let me thank the Asia Society Policy Institute and all of you for gathering. It's great to be here with my colleague and friend, Bill Hagerty. We both serve on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and on the Appropriations Committee. So you're absolutely right. I mean, if you look around the world today, many parts of it are on fire. That's of course true in the Middle East. We have a war raging in Ukraine. But at the same time, it is really important, and I think Congress on a bipartisan basis is trying, working with the Biden administration, to keep our eye on the ball of East Asia and Pacific. If you look at our national security documents, they lay out very clearly that our long-term challenge is in East Asia and the Pacific. It's a huge economic hub, as all of you know, and of course, we name very clearly China as the prime challenge that we will face in the near term, the midterm, and the long term. So yes, lots of conflicts going on around the world, and we can talk about it a little later, there is legislation that has passed already with respect to providing Taiwan with some of the military equipment it needs to defend itself. That was true in the NDAA. If you look at the supplemental request, most of the focus, of course, has been on Ukraine and some of the other partners, but it also includes important provisions, about $2 billion for East Asia and the Pacific security assistance. It includes over $2 billion to help advance the AUKUS agreement. It also includes financing on the economic side to work with the IMF and other international institutions to provide alternatives to countries in the Indo-Pacific region to China's very aggressive economic policies, Belt and Road and others, and to avoid debt traps. So there are a number of provisions that have passed. There are a number of provisions in the works, so we are trying very hard to maintain a focus on East Asia and the Pacific.
We'll get back to the supplemental, but
I might stay on this legislative topic, if I might. Senator Van Hollen mentioned the legislation that was incorporated in the 2023 NDAA, that's our National Defense Authorization Act, and that is intended to make Taiwan more robust, to provide them with more equipment, more know-how, more weaponry, and several billions of dollars in terms of loans and aid will go to Taiwan to help enhance them. There also is a fast-track provision for foreign military sales. This is something I worked on very closely. Morrison, you're here when we worked on foreign military sales between the United States and Japan. This is an effort where we have, I'll just put it in a polite way, great opportunity to improve the process, and in doing so, to improve our interoperability. And by improving our interoperability, that leverages our entire system. You think about the technology that we have developed, the technology we can deliver, the faster we can do that, the faster that we can get it into theater, the more potent, the more capable we will be. And our legislation is aimed at doing just that. We've got more work to do from a process standpoint inside the DoD and the Department of State, but I'm optimistic that we're going to see great progress there. This will help Taiwan resist some of the massive pressure that China is putting on her right now. Also, I would like to say that with respect to China specifically, there is legislation, bipartisan legislation in the works right now that I am working on with Senator Peters. It should be going into committee this week or next for vote, and I guess we're pretty much into next week at this point. But this will prevent the access of U.S. genomic data by Chinese companies. You know, every time we look at our foreign policy, we need to think about reciprocity. China will not allow any access to its genomic data by anyone outside of its borders. We should think about that and not allow the same. There's a company called BGI. There are others that provide machines that detect and analyze our genomic data. We shouldn't be spending U.S. taxpayer dollars on this. This is very analogous to Huawei and 5G, except this time we're talking about Americans' genomic data as opposed to our communications and our confidential data.
And this is a bipartisan panel. We have Democrat, Republican represented. It seems that China-related legislation is one of the few areas where there is agreement on both sides of the aisle. But where are there specifically divergences among the two parties?
I'd be hard-pressed to say, Chris. I think that we are very unified in terms of our views on the threat that China poses. Perhaps we might differ in terms of how to respond, but I really see this as a bipartisan, bipartisan point.
I think that's largely true. I think that's especially true in the Senate. I think it's also broadly true in the House. I think where you begin to find some differences, at least in tone, if not in substance, is between some folks, and I don't think, Senator, I'm not in this category, I don't think Senator Hagerty is either. People say we have to decouple entirely, right, from Chinese economy. I agree with Secretary Yellen and those who say that's not only, it's impractical, it doesn't serve our long-term interests. That said, I am very much in favor of the de-risking strategy, of making sure that when it comes to critical supply chains, whether it's in high-end chips, whether it's in critical minerals and critical minerals processing, that we have to be very actively engaged in de-risking from the PRC economy. And on the export side, both in terms of technology as well as capital, I do support the administration's approach where we want to wall off to the extent we can, and this only works when we do it in collaboration with our partners around the world, very high-end technologies that can be used, for example, to manufacture advanced semiconductors, and an outbound CFIUS framework where we would also ensure that capital from the United States and our partners is not going to advance China's military capacity. So I think there is broad agreement on these issues. Sometimes you do find differences in terms of how people are expressing them.
There has been some criticism that there isn't too much room for moderate voices on China in Congress, and that things like the China House Select Committee perhaps may be stoking more fear. I mean, what do you think the risk is of overestimating the abilities and the intentions of China and creating some unwanted escalation?
Well, I think all we need to do is listen to what China is saying, particularly what President Xi is saying. And when he meets with our president in San Francisco in November and says that his intent is to merge with Taiwan, even by force, we need to listen to that. We need to hear it, as opposed to hearing what we want to hear. We need to listen to the facts. President Xi, if you think about it, go back to 2015, stood in the Rose Garden side by side with President Obama. I'll never forget this. He said he has no intentions of militarizing the islands that they built in the South China Sea. I would ask each of you, if you haven't, go Google Fiery Cross Reef. That's a complete militarization of these islands. Their intent, China's intent, the CCP's intent, is extraordinarily aggressive in terms of overtaking and taking complete control, I would say, of one of the busiest shipping lanes in the world. Look at what happened in the Senkaku Islands. Former Vice Minister Mori's here. I'm sure you dealt with this every day. The CCP ships in the Senkakus surrounding those islands. This is the East China Sea. China has been extremely aggressive. And we need to look at their deeds, not their words.
And we've seen the Biden administration focus on boosting relationships with allies. You were the former ambassador to Japan, especially with South Korea, Japan, Vietnam, Australia. How long-lasting do you think these partnerships are, and how effective are they as a counterweight to China?
Well, I think these partnerships are essential. One of the U.S.'s competitive advantages here and other places around the world, including Europe, are our alliances and our partnerships. And, you have the trilateral agreement at Camp David between the United States, South Korea, and Japan. Very important. We, of course, have very strong relations with the Republic of Korea and Japan, but those two countries, as we all know, have a history of conflict. So bringing everybody together was very important. We both work very closely with ASEAN countries, and it is very important that we continue to recognize the centrality of ASEAN. In fact, as part of the NDAA bill, we had some small gestures. For example, we're creating an ASEAN center here in Washington. It also promotes different programs around the country. You have the Quad. You have AUKUS. So all of these partnerships are very important. I would say at this point, in terms of making sure that our allies understand our commitment, we talked earlier about all the conflicts going around the world. There is no doubt that there's a connection between how we respond in Ukraine and how both our allies in Europe, but also Asia, perceive our credibility and our commitment, and our adversaries around the world. Because we know President Xi is keeping one eye on Ukraine and what happens there and what we do there, and one eye on Taiwan. And we also know that people of Taiwan are watching very closely to see the degree of our commitment. So we mentioned the supplemental at the outset as having some very important provisions for East Asia. Obviously, it's essential for Ukraine. And in my view, you can't say you're tough on China or you want to be realistic about China if you're weak on helping the people in Ukraine protect their sovereignty and their democracy.
Senator Van Hollen, not all of those in the Republican conference agree with that view. And the supplemental is something of huge urgency from the perspective of many, especially the White House. So where is the supplemental package now? And what message does it send to China and the world that it's been stalled for months now? Perhaps we'll start with you.
Well, as you brought this up, I would like to add one point to what Senator Van Hollen said before I come back to the supplemental, and that is regarding the longevity of our alliances in the region. And I think that one of the factors, and many of you here in this room can help with this, is that to the extent we can deepen our economic ties with our allies in the region, we will enhance our national security. I participated in a conference on the shoulders of the APAC conference in San Francisco in November. We did it at Stanford, inviting CEOs from South Korea, from Japan, and from America to talk about how we can deepen our ties. We have the CHIPS Act, a great opportunity to do more R&D together, to advance our technological expertise. We should be doing this together with our greatest allies. And to the extent we can deepen our economic ties, I think that we do extend the longevity of our partnerships from a national security standpoint. So I just want to add that critical point and encourage everybody in this room, because I think you have the same interest. Let's help make that happen. With respect to the supplemental, here's the debate and here's the concern. You're asking why it's been bogged down.
Well, I think where is the supplemental? You know, we're always hearing news, okay, there's agreement, there's urgency to send aid to Ukraine, but of course it's tied to the border. So, you know, where does the supplemental go from here? And what's your view on, you know, it being tied to Ukraine?
The supplemental has multiple components that have been rolled into one. This is a tactic. I'm relatively new to the Senate. I've finished 3 years in the Senate. I've never been in an elective office before. I didn't even run for student council when I was a kid. So I come at it from a business person's perspective. This is very different from the way the business world operates. And what happens is that in Washington, we basically dump a lot of things that we want to see happen into one big package, so that it becomes very difficult to, quote, vote against you fill in the blank. So the supplemental includes funds for Israel, for Ukraine, for Taiwan, for the border, and all of these things are being negotiated at the same time. The complexity of this is extraordinary. And Chris, I don't know how big the supplemental bill is. You've had more experience in the Senate than I would, but it'll be over 1,000 pages, I suspect, if we ever see text. And we have not yet seen text. So there are a lot of negotiations going on, but I will say it's extraordinarily complicated because of the fact that we've combined all of these components.
What message do you think it sends to Putin and Xi Jinping that this supplemental is so delayed and the fact that there is this growing resistance to sending any more aid to Ukraine?
Well, look, I think in the end, what matters is whether or not we actually deliver or not. Clearly, the delay sends a bad signal around the world. Again, not just to our adversaries who are smiling, but to our friends and allies who are worried. At the end of the day, I do believe if we can deliver on this, we will address those issues. And of course, you know, when it comes to Putin, we just saw Turkey finally ratify Sweden's ascension into NATO. You now have Finland and Sweden that have become parts of NATO, or will very shortly. Finland already, Sweden will be finalized. So in the sort of strategic view of all this, I do believe Putin is dramatically miscalculated. That said, if we don't continue to supply and help our friends in Ukraine, that sort of view of what's happening could change. And so it is really important that we move forward. I don't know where we're going, as Bill said. Look, this has got lots of different pieces. I personally thought it was a mistake to add the border security piece. We need to deal with that, absolutely, and there are funds in the bill to do that, and we can address some policy changes. Hooking that issue to the support for Ukraine has become obviously a drag on it. Just last night, the Republican leader, Mitch McConnell, floated the idea, you probably saw, about separating that border security piece off because, frankly, because of some comments that Donald Trump has made on the campaign trail, which may make that even more difficult to resolve. I don't know where this ends. I do just want to quickly come back to Bill's point on the economic strategy. I talked about how we want to sort of de-risk our economy. I talked about how we want to prevent the exports of very high-end technology that can be used in Chinese military. But I agree the most important thing to do is put our house in order here at home. The CHIPS and Science Bill was a very important step forward. Investing in the science part is going to be really important. We funded the CHIPS part. The part that funds AI and quantum computing and all of that piece, we still need to make good on that. I would also argue there are important parts of the Inflation Reduction Act regarding both critical minerals and electric batteries. The last thing we want to do is become dependent on China for EV in the same way a lot of our European partners became so dependent on Russia for gas. So this is a really important thing that we take care of business here at home, and I thought that was an important bill in that regard.
So I'm being told we only have a few more minutes left. I really want to hit on 2 points with both of you. And the first one is the whole world is watching this election in November extremely closely. If Donald Trump becomes the next president, how will that affect the U.S. China relationship and America's positioning on the world stage?
So I served in President Trump's administration. I was the U.S. ambassador to Japan. I just met with President Trump right before Christmas, and we talked about this. He commented to me that he felt that the strongest relationship that we had when he was president was with Japan. And I told him I worked my heart out to make certain that that was the case, and that I felt that we have the momentum with Japan to continue that. I just got back from Japan. And I shared his perspective and view with a number of people that I met with informally there. I think that what we'll see is a continued deepening, and I've complimented the Biden administration on the efforts that have taken place with AUKUS. The trilateral meeting at Camp David, I think, was a wonderful step. I think you'll see us continue to build. There is a bipartisan effort to continue to strengthen relationships in the region. We all applaud the leadership of President Yoon in South Korea and the fact that Prime Minister Kishida has stepped up and embraced that. We want to support that. I think we're going to see a continuation of desire to strengthen our alliances with our existing partners and to broaden that as well. Think about the Philippines, think about Vietnam, think about the other opportunities that we have in the region. I think this is it's been bipartisan to this point and will continue to be so.
Do you agree with that?
Well, here's what I agree on. Bill Hagerty did a very good job as ambassador to Japan under the previous administration, and I'm glad to serve in the Senate with him now. I served in the House with the current ambassador to Japan, Rahm Emanuel, who's also doing, in my view, a very good job in Japan. So we have agreement there. Look, I think if you look around the world, there are partners and allies that are very nervous about various comments that candidate Trump has made and actions he took as president. I mean, beginning with the NATO alliance and all the statements he made, not about burden sharing. That's been a consistent plea from U.S. presidents, but really words that question whether or not we need the NATO alliance. And that kind of language obviously creates concerns with other allies and partners around the world. So this is a much longer conversation, the question you asked about what that would mean in terms of U.S. foreign policy and U.S. credibility. We understandably share a difference of opinion on that, but we do agree on the importance of maintaining these alliances in the region.
And I think I've got about 30 seconds left, so this will be rapid fire. Does the election in Taiwan of Lai Ching-te, at the dismay of Beijing, does that fundamentally change cross-strait relations or the U.S.-Taiwan relationship?
I mean, I certainly don't think so. It's a continuation of the same party there in Taiwan. We watch this very closely. There was a tremendous amount of interference from China. The Taiwanese people stepped up and spoke. The United States, I think, has been consistent in its support for Taiwan. As Senator Van Hollen mentioned, we put in the NDAA ways to continue to strengthen our ties with Taiwan and enhance their capabilities. I don't see any change at all from our perspective.
I agree with Senator Hagerty. I don't see any change here. You have, we all praise the people of Taiwan for the peaceful transfer of power through democratic means. And I think China, while they made a lot of sort of threatening comments in Xi before the election, they have been a little more tempered since then, but the bottom line is what we need to do with our partners in Taiwan, as Bill said. And I want to be clear. I mean, the Biden administration has said and emphasized that what we support is the status quo in the Taiwan Straits. That is our policy. We want to make sure we maintain that status quo and deterrence by making sure that the people in Taiwan have what they need to defend themselves. And that is why you see these provisions that Senator Hagerty and I spoke about that are in the NDA. That's why we have these provisions in the supplemental. All of those work best when we're working with our allies and partners in the region, both on the security dimension, but also very much on the economic front.
Well, thank you so much, Senators. I know you both have to urgently run off, so appreciate it, and thank you all for listening.
Thanks, Selina. Great job.